7 days. Walter Pierce didn't raise his voice when he said it, which somehow made the room quieter. Bring your wife to the final signing, or the Turner Ranch goes back on the market. Caleb stood motionless in front of the banker's desk, while the scratching of pens and low conversation around the office slowly faded. 2 cattle buyers near the wall stopped pretending not to listen. Someone near the window gave a short laugh under his breath. Walter adjusted the land papers calmly, as if humiliating a man in public was no different than balancing numbers. You already approved the transfer, Caleb said. His voice stayed controlled, though his jaw had tightened hard enough to show it. I approved a temporary extension, Walter corrected. A ranch needs stability. Workers notice these things. Investors notice these things. A man living alone after 40 does not inspire confidence. Caleb felt every eye in the room settle deeper on him. That was the part Walter understood best. Public pressure always worked better than private threats. You're asking for a wife in 7 days? Caleb asked. I'm asking for proof your ranch has a future. Walter slid the unsigned papers back into his drawer. Right now, it doesn't. The conversation ended there. Not because Caleb accepted it, because the room had already decided who lost. He stepped outside into the afternoon crowd without looking back. The cold air should have cleared his head. It didn't. Men near the hitching rail glanced toward him, then away too quickly. The story was already spreading. Caleb crossed toward the boarding house, more to escape the staring than from purpose, when a sharp voice stopped him near the steps. You either pay tonight or leave the room. A woman stood beside the doorway, holding a small, dark travel case. Simple gray-brown dress, dark tied hair, calm face. The boarding house owner kept pressing her, growing louder with every unanswered demand. Yet the woman didn't argue, didn't plead, didn't even defend herself. She simply listened, as if the outcome had already been measured. I said you can't stay here anymore. The woman finally spoke. I know. That was all. No desperation, no bargaining. Caleb should have kept walking. Instead, he stopped. Something about the control in her voice cut through the humiliation still burning under his skin. The boarding house owner noticed him immediately. Unless you plan on paying for her room yourself, she snapped. Caleb looked at the woman once. She met his eyes directly. No fear, no curiosity either. Just attention. Then the desperate idea left his mouth before he could reconsider it. Pretend to be my wife for 7 days. The street went silent around them. A wagon slowed nearby. Someone near the feed store turned completely toward them. The woman studied Caleb for one long second, then asked quietly, When does it end? And for the first time that day, Caleb felt like he was no longer the one controlling the conversation. By the time Caleb and Eliza reached the ranch, half the town already knew about the arrangement, and Caleb realized that before he even stepped off the wagon because Wade Mercer was leaning against the fence, waiting for them, with the expression of a man pretending he hadn't come to see something interesting. That was quick work, Wade said, eyes shifting once toward Eliza before returning to Caleb. Bank gives you 7 days? You find a wife before supper? Caleb ignored the comment and started unloading supplies, hoping the conversation would end there. But Wade stayed where he was, watching too carefully, and Eliza noticed it immediately because she positioned herself beside the wagon instead of near the house, keeping both men in view without making it obvious. Town's talking already, Wade continued. Walter Pierce looked ready to swallow nails when you walked out with her. Eliza said nothing. She simply picked up one of the smaller crates and carried it toward the porch without asking where it belonged. though somehow she placed it exactly where it needed to go. Caleb noticed that. He noticed too many things around her. Wade eventually stepped closer, lowering his voice slightly. "You know Pierce will test this, right? Public dinner Saturday, church Sunday. He'll watch everything." "Then he can watch," Caleb replied. Wade looked toward Eliza again, waiting for nervousness, confusion, anything that made the marriage look temporary. He didn't get it. That seemed to bother him more than if she had failed outright. After he left, Caleb carried the last supply sack inside and shut the door harder than intended. "You don't have to impress anyone," he said. "This only needs to survive 1 week." Eliza stood near the table, removing her gloves slowly, carefully smoothing one finger where the leather had worn thin. "People notice more when something looks forced," she said. "Then don't make it look forced." Her answer came too naturally. Caleb leaned back against the counter, studying her again. "You agreed awfully fast." Eliza looked up briefly. "So did you?" That ended his next question before he asked it. Silence settled through the room, though this time it felt less empty than before. Caleb finally pointed toward the back hallway. "Room's there. Luck sticks sometimes." Eliza nodded once and walked toward it, but halfway down the hall she stopped suddenly. Not dramatic, not frightened, just still. Caleb followed her gaze toward the kitchen window above the sink. Nothing moved outside except the fading light across the fence line. "What is it?" he asked. Eliza waited a second too long before answering. That was the first small crack in her rhythm. "Someone was standing near the road earlier," she said quietly, "watching the house." Caleb frowned. "Probably Wade." "No," Eliza replied, her voice steady again now. "Wade wanted to be seen." Then she disappeared down the hallway, leaving Caleb alone in the kitchen with the uneasy feeling that the week had already become more dangerous than either of them admitted. The room inside Harper's hotel grew quieter the moment Caleb and Eliza walked in together. Not silent enough to stop conversation completely, but enough for people to lower their voices while pretending they hadn't noticed. And Caleb felt the shift immediately because Walter Pierce had chosen the dinner carefully. Ranchers, merchants, church families, all crowded into one place where every glance carried judgment disguised as politeness. "You clean up better than expected," Wade muttered, as Caleb passed him near the entrance, though his attention stayed fixed on Eliza, who wore the same gray-brown dress from town, unchanged except for a darker shawl that softened her outline without drawing attention. And Caleb realized then that she dressed the same way she spoke. Nothing memorable unless someone looked too carefully. Walter Pierce greeted them before they reached the table. "Mrs. Turner," he said smoothly, testing the name as much as offering it. Eliza gave a small nod. "Mr. Pierce." No hesitation. No correction. Walter smiled faintly, disappointed he hadn't caught one already. Throughout the meal, the questions kept coming from different directions, harmless on the surface, dangerous underneath. Where did they meet? How long had they known each other? Why had Caleb never mentioned her before? Caleb answered the simpler ones. Eliza answered the rest. Not quickly. Not slowly. Precisely enough that no answer invited another. Caleb began noticing something unsettling in the rhythm of it. She wasn't surviving the conversation. She was controlling it. Whenever a question moved too close to specifics, she redirected attention gently toward someone else at the table before suspicion could settle. Even Walter noticed. Caleb saw it in the way the banker leaned back afterward, studying her instead of testing her. Then came the first real mistake. An older woman near the end of the table smiled toward Eliza and asked casually, "How long have you two been married?" Eliza paused. Barely half a second. Most people wouldn't notice it. Caleb did. For the first time since meeting her, her composure slipped just enough to reveal effort beneath it. "Long enough to stop counting," she answered lightly, and the table laughed softly, tension dissolving before anyone questioned the delay. But Caleb kept watching her afterward, because the pause had not come from confusion. It came from memory. Later, while people gathered near the entrance preparing to leave, Caleb overheard two cattlemen speaking quietly near the coat rack. "Saw someone asking about a dark-haired woman at the train station this morning." "Traveler?" "Maybe. Sounded serious." Caleb turned instantly toward Eliza, but she was already stepping away from the crowd before the conversation fully finished. Calm on the outside, though her hand tightened once against the edge of her shawl before relaxing again. And that tiny movement unsettled him more than panic would have, because it confirmed something he had been trying not to believe. She wasn't afraid of being recognized someday. She had been expecting it from the beginning. By the fourth day, Caleb stopped thinking about the arrangement every time he looked at Eliza, and that should have relieved him because the entire point of the lie was to make it feel believable. Yet instead it unsettled him more, since somewhere between the bank warning and the hotel dinner, the performance had stopped feeling temporary. Workers who normally complained about every small delay now followed Eliza's quiet adjustments without argument, because she solved problems before they slowed anyone down. Feed deliveries reached the barn before rain hit. Broken tools disappeared from work areas before accidents started. Even Wade had stopped making jokes whenever he visited the ranch, because something about the house no longer invited mockery. That morning, Caleb and Eliza rode into town together for Sunday church, and for the first time, Caleb realized people were no longer staring at them out of curiosity alone. Now they were measuring them like a real couple, noticing distance, timing, eye contact, every small movement that could expose weakness. Eliza handled it carefully. Never too close beside him, never too far either. She greeted people politely, but never long enough to invite personal questions, and Caleb caught himself adjusting his own pace naturally to match hers, without thinking about it first. That bothered him more than the town watching. After the service, a rancher near the church steps laughed and asked Caleb, "So how long's married life treating you?" Caleb opened his mouth automatically, ready to repeat the timeline they agreed on, but the answer stalled halfway because for one dangerous second, he genuinely forgot which parts were supposed to be false. Eliza stepped in before the silence stretched too long. "Long enough for him to stop pretending he dislikes company?" she said calmly, and the group laughed while Caleb forced a smile beside her, though internally something shifted hard enough to leave him unsettled for the rest of the afternoon. She covered for him too smoothly. Worse. It sounded true. Later that evening, Caleb entered the kitchen quietly and found Eliza kneeling beside her travel case near the back room. Everything inside remained folded tightly, organized for immediate departure. Boots angled toward the opening, gloves already packed. The case looked less like luggage and more like a person refusing to belong anywhere long enough to unpack properly. Eliza closed it the moment she noticed him watching. "You keep it ready every night?" Caleb asked. She stood slowly, smoothing the front of her dress before answering. "Habit?" "From who?" The question came out sharper than intended. Eliza looked toward the dark window instead of him. "Someone patient," she replied after a slight delay, and for the first time since she arrived, Caleb realized the danger surrounding her was not fast, reckless, or loud. It was something slower, something willing to wait. And somehow that felt worse. The storm reached the ranch just before dark, fast enough to trap 3 travelers and 2 neighboring ranch hands on the road before they could make it back into town. and within minutes Caleb's quiet house filled with wet coats, muddy boots, nervous voices, and the kind of crowded tension that exposed weak marriages faster than arguments ever could. Caleb expected Eliza to pull away from the situation, maybe retreat toward silence the way she did whenever too many people pressed too close. But instead, she moved calmly through the room before problems even formed, clearing space near the stove before the travelers asked where to sit, organizing blankets before anyone admitted they were cold, redirecting conversation whenever questions drifted too close to personal matters. And Caleb stood near the doorway watching it happen with the strange realization that she handled pressure the way other people handled routine. Walter Pierce arrived an hour later after his carriage wheel snapped near the lower trail, and the moment the banker stepped inside, the room changed again, because everyone understood the importance of his opinion, especially now. Caleb expected another quiet inspection, another series of polite traps disguised as conversation, but Walter mostly watched instead, his attention lingering on the way Eliza moved naturally around the house without searching for approval or trying to impress anyone. "Town already believes it," Walter admitted quietly to Caleb while the others settled near the fire. "Believes what?" Caleb asked, though he already knew. Walter glanced once toward Eliza before answering. "That she belongs here." The statement should have solved everything. 7 days almost complete. Ranch secure. Problem ending exactly the way Caleb intended. Instead, the words left a hollow feeling behind that made no sense at all. Later that night, after the storm eased and most of the guests drifted into exhausted silence, Caleb walked into the kitchen expecting to find Eliza still moving through another task. But instead, he stopped short near the doorway. She had fallen asleep sitting upright beside the table, one hand resting near the lamp, boots still on, shoulders slightly slumped, as if exhaustion had finally outrun discipline for a few minutes. The sight unsettled him more than any mystery surrounding her, because for the first time she looked less like someone in control and more like someone tired of needing to be. Caleb lowered the lamp flame carefully so the light wouldn't wake her, and as he turned toward the window, a sharp sound cut through the remaining wind outside. Hoofbeats, slow, controlled, not passing by. Stopping. Caleb looked toward the dark road leading up to the ranch, and before he even saw the rider, he understood something instinctively. The person arriving already knew exactly where to find her. The rider waited beside the front gate long enough to make everyone inside notice him before knocking, and that patience unsettled Caleb immediately because most men carrying bad intentions tried to force urgency into a room, while this one seemed perfectly willing to let tension grow on its own. Walter Pierce looked towards the window first, the remaining ranch hands following after him, and by the time the knock finally came, the entire house had gone still except for the low crack of the fire. Eliza woke the moment the sound reached the door. Not startled, alert. That difference mattered. Caleb crossed the room before anyone else could speak, and opened the door just enough to block the entrance with his shoulder. The man outside removed his gloves slowly, almost politely. Mid-40s, dark coat dusted from travel, calm eyes that moved once toward the room behind Caleb before returning to him. "Evening," the stranger said. "I'm looking for Eliza Rowan." The name settled heavily through the house because several people behind Caleb heard it clearly, including Walter Pierce, whose silence suddenly became more dangerous than questions. "You've got the wrong place," Caleb answered. The man studied him for a second longer than necessary, not aggressively, simply measuring whether the lie came from loyalty or ignorance. "No," he said quietly. "I don't think I do." Behind Caleb, nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. The stranger stepped one pace closer to the porch light without crossing onto it. Tell her Elias Vane came alone. Caleb felt the shift behind him before hearing it. Not movement, recognition. He turned slightly and saw Eliza standing near the hallway entrance, one hand resting against the wall beside her. Her expression stayed controlled, but for the first time since he met her, she answered slower than usual. "You shouldn't have come," she said quietly. Elias looked at her then, and something unreadable passed briefly across his face. Not anger, not relief either. Familiarity. "You disappeared," he replied. "People noticed that." Walter Pierce finally stepped forward from the back of the room. "Is there a problem here?" Elias glanced toward him calmly. "Depends what story she told you." The sentence hit harder because he spoke it without accusation. Caleb looked toward Eliza instinctively, waiting for denial, explanation, anything that simplified the situation. It never came. "I never lied," Eliza said after a moment. "I just didn't explain." Walter's attention sharpened immediately at that line. Caleb felt the room tilting toward suspicion, toward judgment, toward the exact kind of public collapse Walter Pierce understood how to use. Elias looked back toward Caleb then and said quietly, "She never stays anywhere once people begin depending on her." Eliza lowered her eyes briefly at that. Another tiny crack, barely visible. But Caleb saw it. And in that moment, standing between the woman who had changed his house and the man who clearly knew her better than he did, Caleb realized the danger wasn't that Eliza had brought trouble to the ranch. It was that she fully intended to leave before the trouble could reach him. By morning, the story had already spread across town faster than the storm clouds had the night before, and Caleb felt it the moment he rode toward the bank, because conversation stopped too quickly when he passed, while people who usually nodded now watched in careful silence, waiting to see whether the fake marriage would collapse under public pressure exactly the way Walter Pierce once predicted. Eliza rode beside him without speaking, her posture steady, though Caleb noticed she kept her gloves on even after the morning air warmed, as if holding herself together required one final layer between her and the world. Inside the bank, Walter Pierce stood near the signing table with the ranch papers already prepared. But the atmosphere had changed completely from the humiliation of 7 days earlier, because now the room wasn't wondering whether Caleb could find a wife. It was wondering whether he would keep one. Elias Vane remained near the back wall, calm as ever, saying nothing, which somehow made his presence heavier than accusation would have. Walter finally broke the silence. "Before we proceed," he said carefully, "there are concerns regarding the nature of this arrangement." Caleb understood exactly what the banker was offering him. Distance yourself from her publicly, protect the ranch, let the town believe you were misled. The solution stood right there waiting for him. Simple, safe, temporary, exactly the kind of life Caleb had lived before Eliza arrived. Walter looked toward him expectantly. "Was this marriage legitimate?" The room held still. Caleb looked once toward Eliza. She didn't plead with him, didn't try to defend herself. That hurt more than if she had, because somewhere along the way she had already accepted leaving. Caleb exhaled slowly and answered without looking back at Walter. "It started as an arrangement." A few people shifted immediately, sensing collapse coming. Then Caleb continued. "But whether it started honestly doesn't matter anymore." Silence hit harder this time because nobody expected certainty from him. Walter's expression tightened slightly. "You understand what's at risk here?" "Yes," Caleb replied. "Do you?" The question landed harder than raised voices ever could. Walter studied him for a long moment, then finally slid the papers forward across the desk. No speech, no approval, just acknowledgement. The meeting ended quietly after that, though the tension followed them all the way back to the ranch. Eliza packed before sunrise the next morning, while Caleb worked outside pretending not to notice. He didn't stop her. Didn't ask her to stay. When he came inside later, the back door stood unlocked, and the lantern near the kitchen window still burned low beside an empty hook where her travel case should have been. Caleb stood there longer than he should have, staring at the space she left behind, until a soft sound near the hallway made him turn. Eliza stood there holding the travel case at her side, not packed now, just carried. "The road's clear," she said quietly. Caleb nodded once. "You should go then." Eliza looked at him for a long second before setting the case gently against the wall instead. "Not yet," she answered. And this time neither of them pretended the answer was temporary. At what moment do you think Caleb stopped pretending? If this story stayed with you, subscribe Echoes of a Rancher for more frontier stories where quiet choices change everything.